Good evening, good evening, good evening, everybody. Welcome to a wonderful Thursday here in Breton. I'm back in the studio. Yesterday was an excellent episode. Paul Deary, if you didn't get a chance to see it, go check it out. And please be ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a big episode. Maxime Bernier, we're doing the Great Canadian Relay. We're going to have a whole bunch of candidates from Canada come on and chat with us. And then we're going to have a whole question period. And we're in person at the Bourbon House Tex-Mex Cantina in Drayton Valley. So if you can join us there, that'd be wonderful to see you there because it's going to be a big event. Please come early. Max may be there as early as 4. Doors open at 5, and the live show starts at 6. And bring your questions, because the whole point is to go ahead and have an opportunity to speak directly to Max. And if you're interested in any of the candidates or even myself, we will answer questions as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. So that's the Bourbon House in Drayton Valley, and you'll find us online on all the platforms, including some of the others. So I think we'll be on Max's streams as well. But tomorrow, 8 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Mountain, 8 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you check it out. I'm very, very excited about this episode. I know I get excited a lot, but I got 2 fantastic guests. One who's been on the show quite a few times now, and one who's making his first appearance. So Bruce Pardy's back again, and we're going to be getting into some more of the legal. Remember, he's a legal professor at Queen's University over in Ontario, and he's just been doing the rounds too. He was on Jordan Peterson recently, educating Dr. Peterson on how the Constitution works, how the system works, and some of the stuff that's coming down the pipeline, and some of the pushback on possibly the Liberals, for sure, but even looking a little bit ahead on what's coming down with Polyev. And then we have Matthew Ehret. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to say your name, but we'll get there. That could be the first fact check that you do for me, is correct how you say your last name. But he was recommended to us, and I looked into him, and oh my gosh, where has he been? Because he's definitely somebody should have been on the show sooner, but I'm really glad he said yes. We got an hour with him, so we're going to go ahead and bring them on. So without further ado, let me get in Bruce and Matt. Hey, Matt, how do you say your last name?
You were close. You're Ehret, like an Eric at the end instead of the
Okay, well, if you watch the show, this is what I'm really bad at. I'm really bad at with names. So you just made the wall of shame for Jason. Thank you very much for joining us. And my first introduction to you. So a little bit of email back and forth, but I haven't actually had a chance to talk with you. So thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this. And hi, Bruce.
Hello, Matt. How are you?
I'm good.
And Bruce is one of our favorites as well, so I'm glad you guys get to hang out, and we'll get into this. So we're just going to dive into it because we're talking about a prorogued government. We had John Carpe on last week. The JCCF has initiated a lawsuit against the proroguing. As you may know, in the UK, they had a similar situation where the government prorogued. And John's contention here on this lawsuit is basically you can't prorogue for party purposes or any other purposes but the people's purpose. So something to do with the people. You can't just prorogue for convenience. And this is kind of what we dug into last week. But what I want to jump into with both of you gentlemen here is, what does it mean from your perspective? What do you think is going on? And what happens if the JCCF is successful on reversing this? And then we'll kind of get into a conversation about, is this the best system we have? Can we improve this? And maybe there's a future in Canada that looks a little bit different than what we're seeing right now. Let's go ahead and introduce you again, Bruce, to the audience for some of the newcomers who are joining us. And then we'll jump into Matt as well.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, I'm a law prof at Queen's. I run a small think tank called Rights Probe, which is a branch of the Energy Probe Research Foundation. It's a law and liberty think tank. And maybe I'll just leave it at that and dive right in. So a lot of people are upset with this proroguing decision, and I completely understand that, and I share it. I'm not quite so on board with the challenge to it. Not that it's not justified, but that proroguing is part of the landscape when you have a Westminster system of government. I mean, yeah, Parliament's been prorogued lots of times, and for various reasons. And the point about it being for to serve the people's purpose and not the party purposes is fair enough. But much of our Constitution, like much of the Constitution in the UK, is constitutional convention. That is, it's not written down. It's not part of the text of our Constitution. And when we say constitutional convention, we mean that this is done basically by tradition, by the people who are working inside the system, and not enforceable by the courts. And so the real question is, do you really want the courts interfering in this kind of thing? Because this is essentially a political decision and also a function of the prerogative of the crown. So I'm a little bit reluctant to say that the courts should step in and say that this cannot be done. I do not think that proroguing in this case, as much as I don't like it, is really an existential crisis for the country. This threat of tariffs, as real as it is not the kind of thing. It's not the equivalent of Brexit, which was the occasion of the proroguing of the British Parliament that got overturned by the UK Supreme Court. So, yes, it's bad. I don't approve, but I'm not keen on having the court step in and deal with a political question.
And I kind of echo that one too. I'm not a big fan of a single judge or the court doing things. I prefer if it was at least the parliament and possibly the executive. Matt, let's go to you. Let's go ahead and introduce you as well, and kind of where your initial position is on this.
Yeah, thanks. I'm the editor-in-chief and founder of the Canadian Patriot Review, a historical magazine I founded in 2012, and I'm also the director of the Rising Tide Foundation, and recently set up something called the Academy for International Cooperation. So that's a few of the hats. Also wrote a book series on the untold history of Canada. It's a 4-volume series that I put out a few years ago. So, I mean, it's a difficult one because there's a few levels that I tend to think, or when I analyze these types of shenanigans in the peculiar monarchical system that is Canada. It's a very, very strange system. And as Bruce mentioned, it's very much based on precedent. It's got a relatively arbitrary function baked into the system, which is kind of, I think, designed to be something that is arbitrary and ambiguous in order for political maneuvering by the real powers that I see are behind the scenes shaping much, not all, but much of the domestic and foreign policy considerations of Canada as within a broader geopolitical game. Because I don't see Canada as a thing unto itself. In my history, in my research, I've increasingly found I could only make sense of why things happen, including the existence of Canada per se, as a thing, like from whether it be an Act or the earlier Acts of Union or the 1791 Act. You can't make sense of any of that if you don't look at the principal battle between the hereditary structures of the British Empire and how that system has reacted to try to undo the damage 76 exemplars of our southern cousins down below, who went off the rails and did the unthinkable by creating a different type of system based upon the rejection of hereditary powers, ideas of privy council, lords, hereditary, dams and lords and all of that stuff. That was just rejected. The powers or the fount of all honors of a hereditary crown, that was just rejected as absurd, which it is. And so Canada has always been sort of a battleground between different factions. Sometimes, you've got them, not recently, but throughout our history, at times there have been sort of what I might call Republican small R, not the Republican Party, representatives who gain some influence within the provincial or federal government now and again, rarely, versus those who would wish to keep Canada locked into the great game. And so when it comes to the things like the prorogation right now, I don't see it as legitimate. I am a Republican at heart, so I do kind of want, ultimately, at the end of the day, though there's many steps before that could even happen, a completely different kind of government founded on natural law and not something that's so arbitrary. So in my mind, I'm very, very sympathetic to any type of resistance to arbitrary acts that shut down the government for the sake of some, realignment of certain power players, in Mark Carney or somebody else that's a little bit more useful to the empire at the moment. So that's where I'm standing on it. It's not very satisfying of an answer, but that's on that.
I find it a satisfying answer, and you brought in Mark Carney as well because he might be one of the power players behind the whole proroguing as well. Because maybe they want some time, they want to go get that leader, kind of pause everything, and that's kind of where John's position was. Is it shouldn't be for party reasons. It's got to be for other reasons if you're going to do this. We'll go back to you, Bruce. So what he's talking about is we're part of something much bigger, and we don't make a lot of sense just individually, like an isolated entity, but we make a lot of sense of the current structure when we look at a bigger picture, and we don't necessarily need to be in that picture. What's your take on what Matt had to say there?
Well, I mean, I'm with Matt. I would prefer a Republican system as well, and I think we should do what we have to do to get one. But my point is that until you get one, if as long as you still have a Westminster system, these are the rules upon which the Westminster system works. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we should pretend that we're going to be able to act more like a republic if we're not one. So you have to accept what you've got until you can find a way to get rid of it. And that to me, so I think a lot of time is being spent on this proroguing business because it upsets people, and I totally understand why. But it's a distraction for me. I think it's not the main event, and the main event for me has suddenly turned into there's an opportunity here to live under a Republican government, and that Republican government is American. Let me put it another way, bluntly. The prospect of constitutional change in this country in any meaningful way is virtually nil. And even if it wasn't, you wouldn't want to go down that route because it's likely to go the wrong way. So if you have a design, an aspiration to change the constitutional arrangement in Canada from what it is to something more like a republic, then at the moment you have only one good opportunity, and that is think about how you join the Americans. And I have a route to that, and I'm not the one who invented it, but you go like this, and this is my colleague Larry Solomon who suggested this to me, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You don't become the 51st state. You get one or maybe two provinces at a time, and Alberta is the first logical choice. You hold a referendum in Alberta, you win the referendum on a clear question, and then once you're through that threshold, then everything will start to line up. The reason that we can do this is because we have a precedent, and the precedent is because we've had separatism in Quebec for a long time. The Supreme Court has weighed in on this. There's a federal act that describes, the steps that must be taken. Any other route is going to require traditional kinds of amendments to our Constitution, and our amending formula is so demanding on important things that it's not in the cards. So if you're serious about wanting a republic, and I agree with Matt about that, then we better think seriously about taking this opportunity and walking through this door.
There's a lot of people echoing that 51st state, and I like where Bruce is going with this because it may just cause everybody to kind of reconsider what's going on. And I think that's kind of what Trump might have had in mind when he was talking to Greenland, Pamela Canal, and us, because all of us could kind of make changes. Maybe that's what he had in mind, is have that conversation open up and start thinking about what it would mean to be the 51st state. What would a republic mean if we had a constitution and a governor? What would that mean? I think Bruce might be right. We might be in a good time to really explore this conversation further. Matt, what are your thoughts about maybe Alberta stepping up first? Other provinces might take the lead, and this might become something a little bit bigger.
Yeah, because you have I'm again very sympathetic to that as well. I mean, from the standpoint of just rational strategy, there's two factors to play with here. You've got the legal aspect, and then you've got the cultural aspect. Now, in the case of a lot of the east coast of Canada, there's a lot more anti-Americanism that's been baked in over 2 centuries of propaganda baked into our school system. The idea that we're not American, it has a deep effect on the zeitgeist as a power that is irrational but strong. Even though we sound American, we have a lot of American cultural institutions. We all watch, Seinfeld and laugh at The Simpsons and have McDonald's every second block. despite all of that, there is this weird neurotic disorder that's been baked into our psyche. And I think that has a lot to do with the British approved, roundtable approved revisionists that have sort of created sort of sacred stories, national myths about us as the anti-American, like we're the English speaking cousins who were more well behaved and obedient to the crown and king. And as such, we had the patience to know that if we just waited and didn't fight for anything, we would be eventually granted freedoms, which we were. And, it's all garbage. I mean, as far as I could see it, it's not true. But they don't have those problems culturally in Alberta. There's a lot more sympathy to the American sort of spirit, the idea of pioneering, the idea of entrepreneurialism, for a variety of reasons. And they have an economy which is much more capable of some sovereign action. Just the resources alone, but also the agricultural base, the potential to have a viable industry, the appreciation of blue collar work. Saskatchewan has a good deal of that too, and not as much as Alberta. So it's Bruce is totally right. I think practically speaking, it's got to come from the dam's cracks are the strongest in Alberta, at which point if you can get a precedent there, and a referendum is a great way to just assert the will of the people. Of course, then it's going to force other crises in the system, like the fact that the lieutenant governor is going to have to make a choice of, do they veto, do they give royal assent, or recognize that, because that's the hand legally of the crown, right? Everything that becomes law or has to get royal assent. And typically the crown has the power, one of the prerogative powers of the crown is to reject. And that'll be a nice crisis to see how they deal with that. I'd like to think that they're going to go along with the force of the people. But then that could open up the door for a similar discussion that would immediately happen in Saskatchewan and other places to follow suit, realizing that life is going to be a lot better if we have a relationship with a spirit that is, I mean, currently, there's a rejection of the Green New Deal degrowth agenda through the Patriot recovery in the U.S. that has a lot of problems to it. That makes me nervous. But there's a general spirit towards promoting industry, getting rid of the regulations. And these are things that we desperately need in Canada if we're going to build our industries back that we've lost over 50 years of globalization. So, yeah, and then who knows what could happen elsewhere in Quebec and other parts of the country.
I think you bring up a good point, because Canada, when it was kind of starting off, it was all east. We had Upper Canada, Lower Canada, and a really long history there. And also in the 1776 era, all the loyalists came up. So the U.S. kind of flushed out all the people that were loyal to, well, not flushed out. They made a choice. You basically had to choose. Do you want to follow the king, or do you want to break away? So there was a separation there. So our history is rich and is very deep with the monarch and an alignment to the loyalist side of things. But that was on the east. That was in the east when we were a younger Canada. Now that we grew up and expanded west, and there was like basically another generation of Canada, we kind of have a distinct society here. Is that where this divide is coming from? Or is it more of a Western rugged sovereign approach that we just always had as cowboys and hard workers? Or is there a divide in Canada from like a historical perspective? Bruce, I'll throw it to you, and then we'll see where Matt goes with it.
Well, certainly there's lots of history to it, and yeah, we're the descendants of those people who did not want to revolt, who wanted to stay under the thumb of the crown, which is not. It's I'm gonna put it this way: our forefathers, in my opinion, made the wrong call. But it's not too late to correct it. But yes, historically and to the present day, the power centers in Canada tend to be, Central Eastern, and so you might think if Alberta goes or starts to go, the hope would be that it would start a cascade.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be that Ontario and Quebec are the last holdouts, because they have the elites in those places have the most to lose, and certainly the people who are in the federal government have everything to lose. So they might hold out. But the second province, and maybe they would go together. This is Larry Solomon's proposition. The two that maybe should go together are Alberta and Newfoundland, because Newfoundland, of course, is the most recent addition to Canada, and they played around with joining the States before they came to Canada. And so it hasn't been really that long. And they might just decide that they would be better off with the Americans in retrospect anyway. So if you had those two, one on the east and one, central west, if you got those two provinces, then the job is basically done, because others would start to go. The maritime provinces couldn't hang on without most of the rest of the country. Quebec might decide to be independent after all. I mean, who knows? But BC has a natural association with Washington and Oregon and California anyway. It's just important to get the first couple, and then we're on our way. Now, I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression, though. This is not a thing that can literally be done unilaterally. Like the Alberta government can't decide to issue a proclamation tomorrow that they're gone. This is what the Supreme Court of Canada said when it was considering the possible secession of Quebec. They said it can't be done unilaterally. On the other hand, the federal government and other provinces can't unilaterally prevent it. So once you have the legitimacy of a citizen referendum that's passed on a clear question, then essentially the Supreme Court has suggested that it's constitutionally required to have a negotiation. And then you get into nitty gritty. But I'm not worried about that. I would like to get the show on the road, though.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt, back to you, because he makes a good point there. We can't just do it. There's a constitution that requires cooperation, and getting the conversation started might be the catalyst to that domino effect where they all start to jump on board, or at least the conversation gets really loud. And you might be right, Bruce, where Quebec might just be independent on its own, doesn't join the states or anything else, it just goes on its own. And there's a lot of options. Provinces could do that. Some of them probably can't afford it, but some of them might, like Quebec and even Ontario, because they're a very distinct culture in Ontario than at least the West. Matt, your perspective on the history and the divide almost?
Yeah. Well, I think that what you originally noted about the different culture of the West Coast, the pioneering culture, the sense of the individual that can just go and figure things out and do it. That can-do mentality, that is the consequence of just having charted a course across, undeveloped territory over many, many years, is not an experience we've really had ever in the East Coast. So that does create a different cultural dynamic on a certain level. But I think that when you look at the strategy, like Quebec has an interesting quality about it where, under the period of Daniel Johnson Sr., there was a certain revival of the national union idea of the Papineau groupings, Papineau being somebody who in the 1840s fought to have an annexation movement, which had a lot of support. I mean, Canada was getting choked under the Empire. The only kind of idea that there would be a future would be at that time in the 1840s, 1850s to work with to join the United States even. And his nephew, Louis-Antoine de Soule, became a leader of that pro-Republican faction that fought. They were called Les Rouges. They had a journal called the National Union, which later became a political party under Duplessis and Paul Sauvé and Daniel Johnson. And that represented a paradigm that sought to try to value industrial production as a part of the general ethos of what is needed to make a citizenry viable. And it was not based so much on what came after the Quiet Revolution that overthrew that entire paradigm. It was really a technocratic revolution overseen by, Maurice Strong, Walter Lockhart Gordon played a role in this kind of reset first of Quebec. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was first marketed because he was a player in the de-Christianization of Quebec. And that involved also a big social engineering, rewiring of the education system to bring in a whole bunch of theories that were formerly being rejected, that would make society more pliable, more inclined to become adaptive cogs in a machine. But Daniel Johnson had an idea when he came back with the Union Nationale in 1966. He had a close alliance with Charles de Gaulle, and because of de Gaulle's relationship to him, also you had the Catholic movement around Bobby Kennedy in the U.S. that had a huge political power that was trying to provide a sort of support against this Malthusian anti-humanist agenda that Maurice Strong and others were representing. They had a power base, but again, it wasn't because Quebec was fighting it alone. They had that relationship of powerful Republican leaders like de Gaulle, like the groupings that were still representing JFK's policies in the U.S. Before I believe Daniel Johnson was probably murdered at the unveiling of the big dam. But the idea was, he said, okay, look, Ottawa's continuing to strangle our aspirations for industrial development. We want to build the Manicouagan Dam. We want to build we want to have a nuclear energy sector. We want all of these things to give vitality to the people. But we're being strangled. The Bank of Canada is cutting us off. We're being sabotaged. So he's like, well, independence if necessary, but not necessarily independence was his platform. And he's like, if we could get back to that type of cooperative spirit with a Diefenbaker like Ottawa, because Diefenbaker and Daniel Johnson had a strong relationship of trust. And even though Diefenbaker had his problems as a uber monarchist, he still loved industrial progress and was trying to bring that about in the limited way he knew how. But he wasn't trying to sabotage Quebec. But he's like, if you can go back to that, talking to Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, we'll stay with you. But if not, we're going to have a referendum. And then his enemy, René Lévesque, wanted to do. René Lévesque was Daniel Johnson's enemy, ironically, as was Pierre-Elliott Trudeau. And I think Lévesque and Trudeau had a lot more in common than they differed from, even though history has shown us a different picture. It was a much more there's many more fallacies in that idea of independence that René Lévesque was pushing that was tied to the technocracy that Daniel Johnson didn't have that problem. So if you can get that kind of conversation back in the rural areas, I've noticed, I live in Quebec. In the rural areas, there's a lot more receptivity and hunger to restoring a legitimate idea of independence. But in Montreal and Quebec City, it's not there. It's much more controlled by a sort of very dark Freemasonic force that I don't even want to talk necessarily in detail. But it's a very problematic structure of control in Quebec that in the cosmopolitan areas that wouldn't allow that. But no, I mean what Bruce said. The FDR had a whole plan with Newfoundland to they had a military base up there, and there's a plan to bring Newfoundland into the U.S. during before World War II was over. That's cool. That's an interesting idea, and certainly the Maritimes haven't benefited economically. Like, look, compare the Maritimes of Canada to their sister, states in the U.S., Boston, Massachusetts, New Jersey. The economy there has been it's totally different. It's a real robust, even though it's been destroyed under globalization. It's still comparatively so much better than the type of nothing we have with the even we destroyed our own fisheries. We got nothing. So they would love to get a little bit of hope in economic. So I think on the last point I'll throw out is that before the political changes happen, I think the thing that would be needed would be the economic development that would begin to build things again. So if we can get some real, Trump proposed, there's a discussion now to revive the Keystone, other pipelines that would really create jobs, create a sense of faith in the future again. The rail line that Trump endorsed in 2020, the Alaska to Canada Railway, he gave it an executive order. I mean, shit, if you go and actually revive that again after 4 years and have for the first time rail connecting Alaska through Alberta to the lower 48, that's again going to create tons of amazing jobs, secondary, tertiary jobs that will again create a vitality for that conversation of the political changes that can only happen, I think, after some ground is moved, economically speaking, I think. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it could happen sooner. I don't know.
I like where you're headed with that because we kind of had those trigger words already, economic. And you said economic development, but there also might be economic recovery because Trump did say he was going to use economic force to get his will passed. And sometimes it takes a change in players. So, Bruce, I'm going to throw it back to you. So, historically, we haven't really had this conversation a lot. We were under Queen Elizabeth. There seemed to be a generational acceptance of her in the monarchy because she did represent what the monarch should represent, which is a class, a good way to live, something to aspire to, some strength. But since she passed, King Charles hasn't received the same type of honor or respect. People don't seem to connect with him the same way they did with Elizabeth, maybe because they grew up with her, maybe because their grandparents and parents grew up with her as well. But Charles is not rubbing everybody the same way that Elizabeth did. Now, we're seeing a bit of a trend in the global stage where Jamaica's moving to a republic, Greenland's moving to or talking or moving to a republic or being independent, and Canada has the lowest amongst the Commonwealth countries of support for the monarch at 23% right now. So we are, like you said, it's kind of like it's the right time. So with Charles coming in, not getting the support of Canadians like Elizabeth did, with Trump coming in, kind of spurring on his conversation, and with a change in government on the horizon for Canadians as well, is this the perfect storm? Is this why you think it might be a good time to start talking about this?
Yes, it's a perfect storm in all kinds of ways, in those ways and others, right? Because Canada is a wreck right now. It's been made into a wreck by our leaders. And not just federal leaders. A whole bunch of people have been involved in this. And so I'm not saying it can't be put back together again, possibly over time, but this is as good a time as any. And our comparable success compared to the States is dismal. But I don't think I agree with Matt about the economic developments first. I think we have to recognize that there will be constituencies in Canada that are dead set against this no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Because their interests depend upon them being the big fish in our small pond. And in order to maintain their status, this has to continue to be the small pond, an independent small pond. And so you have to go over their heads. You know, the people have to say, no, we're fed up with this. We're fed up with you. We're not doing this anymore. We're going straight to the source. We're going to hold our own referendum. And we don't care what you say. And put them in such a bind that they have to proceed. Now, fortunately, some of our elites, like not federal ones, but if you think about Danielle Smith, for example, the UCP in Alberta, there is no reason why the Alberta government and the Premier of Alberta couldn't do just as well being the governor of Alberta and the state of Alberta. I mean, why not? They'd be probably better off. So you leverage the advantage to them, and you try to overcome the disadvantage to the other embedded folks. There are going to be forces within the federal government, within Ontario and Quebec, that will be dead set against this no matter what. I don't care if you build a railway. I don't care if you build pipelines. I don't care what happens. They are going to fight to the end to maintain their status within the country, to make sure that the country continues for that purpose. So I say go around them, go over them, just ignore them. You have to proceed on the assumption that they're going to be dead set against the plan no matter what.
You make a good point there, because it's not just going to be the economic or even just a choice or even Alberta do it. There's a lot more factors, a lot more levers that are being pulled. So, Matt, a couple of them is the federal government is the largest employer in Canada. And they're the ones that are going to be under, kind of targeted on this, because it would basically be no more. So you already have a really large base who's going to be pushing against that. And of course, media would not want this as well. The current state of our media, because it's very state funded, and they'll be seeing their demise coming down the horizon as well. So they will be on afterburners trying to push the message that this is going to divide Canada, destroy Canada, create a civil war. You're going to hear all that kind of stuff just having this conversation. In fact, Barbara Pardy, Barbara Perry, I think it is. She is pushing this whole extremist narrative, and they use her as an expert for some of this. I think it's Perry. Anyways, one of her checklist items, what makes you an extremist, is the desire to be a republic. So if you express a desire to be a republic because that's against the government, you must be an extremist. So you can see very quickly how this narrative can be ushered in, that this is a division of Canada, and they'll use words like civil war. But when you, me, and Bruce are talking, we're actually talking about a better future, not a civil war. But you can see these levers and how they're going to be played. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And, there are those who would wish to have even some chaos in order to justify a bigger clampdown. So they're going to inflame that partially because they want to create it, and they'll have agents provocateurs and Antifa and other things and other, infiltrators that will try to do what they've been doing for color revolutions forever. I mean, even when you look at the French Revolution, right, and how that was converted into a Jacobin bloodbath, and the great aspiration of creating a republic in Europe for the first time came undone, despite the fact that all of Benjamin Franklin's allies around Marquis de Lafayette who were vital in making the American Revolution a success and wanted to replicate that success in Europe, which if it was successful in France, it could have then been replicated in other places where there was a large Republican organizational force and cultural force, even in Prussia and in Spain, even, and in Poland big time. Didn't work out though, right? So there's a lot of shenanigans, subterfuge operations that involved all of Ben Franklin's allies, the greatest leaders getting their heads chopped off within a few years of chaos, and a lot of fake revolutionaries were infused into the Jacobin leaders. Were infused to turn the mob into a crazed rabble that demanded off with their heads. Every 2 seconds, mostly poor people, as well as every qualified leader. So then that created a vacuum, a natural vacuum, and where there's a vacuum, that it will be filled, and thus Napoleon was a useful sort of proto-fascist chaos manager to solve the bring in order out of the chaos. But there was a guy named Sadi Carnot, who was a Republican who was trying to keep things alive, and he made a point: it's better to have Republicans without a republic than a republic without Republicans. So my question is, do we have in Canada a sufficient spirit of republicanism, which is different from like that? That's a society of citizens that recognize that they're not subjects. A subject is somebody who expects their rights to be given to them, their lives to be kind of pampered by forces that are beyond their influence. Versus a citizen is somebody who takes responsibility and recognizes your rights are part of a responsibility to defend them, right? And so my concern is I see more of that in Alberta, as far as that cultural vibe that sees responsibility with freedom. I don't see that much of it. I'm not confident in the rest of Canada having that type of cultural dynamic to carry it out properly. So again, I that's partially where I'm like very much oriented towards like, I agree with you, Bruce, that I think that forcing the issue in Alberta is viable. Like you could jump past what I was just saying about economic, rehabilitation and growth, and for the sake of Alberta, you could definitely, I think, do that. For the rest of Canada, I think you have to get people into that. You have to transform the character of the people is currently, I think, culturally incompetent and too intellectually and morally mediocre for the majority of Canada to take on those responsibilities. And it's sort of, I live in Quebec, I don't want to believe what I'm saying, but I this is through observation and being a political activist. I think you've got to like slowly grow a Republican culture. And that is something that you do through partially going outside of yourself, learning real skills, thinking about the future again, which we haven't done for a long time. And economic development in the real sense is a good way to start building up those capabilities morally. Yeah.
Part of our challenge too here, Matt and Bruce, is the courts here in Alberta. So I know you both kind of identified Alberta as a possible springboard for all of this, but let me kind of highlight a couple of the things we've seen in the courts, the criminal courts here. So Tony Olenek, during his trial, he was one of the Coots guys that got sentenced to 6.5 years. Some of the evidence brought forward by the Crown was, for example, he wrote 1776 in his diary. There wasn't anything else around it. It wasn't, we need one, it's time for our, or anything like that. They just 1776. And they pointed to that as not Republican-like, but radical-like. That was the word that they used a lot of, radical-like. And radical was any time you wanted a change of the system, of the government, any more than just tax numbers or something. Like you wanted a fundamental systemic change, sure, you're getting labeled as a radical. So in the courts here, people are being kind of identified as these Republicans within a system, and they're being targeted and silenced. And I think this is Alberta's setting the precedence on this.
Right, but see, this is a reflection of how close this is.
Yeah.
If they weren't doing that, then they wouldn't be worried about it. Right? And Matt is right. The question is not, are there enough people who want to be Republicans in Canada? That's not the question, because the answer would be no. Right now, the answer would be no. But the question is, are there enough people in Alberta? Because as we've been talking about, you only need to do the first one. And then whatever happens, happens. I mean, all the Canadians across the country, if Alberta looks like it's managed to figure out a way to go, then all the Republicans who live across the country will move to Alberta. So they will join Alberta in joining the states. I mean, you can drain the country, and the other provinces, if they're sensible, will follow. And if they're not, then they won't. But and it might be quick, and it might take a long time. But let's just think a minute about the other country involved in this, the U.S., because the U.S. is in a bit of trouble too. It's not perfect. You're not heading to utopia. We've seen all the trouble in the United States. It's just that right now they seem to be on the mend in some respects, and we'll see how that works out. But their constitution over time has proven to be more robust than ours. So much of the reason we want to go, I mean, it's including the economic development and the spirit of both republicanism, freedom, and prosperity. All those things are important, but we also want the Constitution. That Constitution does have some flaws in it. And if we're really smart, if the people in Alberta were really smart, the people negotiating on behalf of Alberta were really smart, I would package it this way. This is blue skying, I admit, but let's just think about it for a minute. So, first thing is one way to persuade your people that this is a good idea for them, not just as a society, but also for them individually, is to say, look, one of the terms is that the Canadian dollar will be recognized as the American dollar 1-to-1, so that you are able to be Americans and not be a second-class economic citizen. And the second thing is that as Alberta negotiates, and maybe Newfoundland too, negotiates to become part of the Americans, I would say this to the Americans. I would say, look, we, Alberta and Newfoundland, would like to join you. This is not a merger. We would like to join your country. But how about this? As we join, there's going to be a moment. You're going to make some constitutional amendments to allow us to join. While we're at it, let's make some tweaks to your Constitution to fix the problems. Not to make the Constitution more Canadian, but to make your American Constitution more American. Because over time, you and we have seen the ways in which it is slightly deficient. The architecture is good. The idea is good. You're a republic that is sound. We're coming to you for all those reasons, but we do see some flaws, and I'm sure you see them too. If you make these tweaks, then we will help you to achieve the vision that you yourself have described for your own country. There's a way to defeat the administrative state by making a constitutional tweak. And it might not be the only tweak, but there are solutions to the problems that the Americans have right now. They should use us as the opportunity to make the changes they need to make themselves more like themselves.
I kind of like that, but the first thing that went through my mind is like when you invited somebody to move in with you, and suddenly they're moving all the furniture around on you before they move in. So we got to be delicate with that conversation. But
but the beauty of it is, that, and they might say no way, which is fine. But the beauty of it is that you're giving them the opportunity to do what they actually want to do already. If they don't receive it that way, then fine. But can I ask? But a lot of people would receive it that way, I think, right now in the U.S.
Can I ask, just out of curiosity, what would be some of those changes for you that would be paramount?
Well, so for example, you could put into the Constitution, the American Constitution now, a non-delegation doctrine, meaning that both Congress and the legislatures of the states could not delegate substantive lawmaking power to administrative agencies. That is, all the value judgments, all the real substantive policy decisions to be made in the law are to be made by legislatures and not by agencies, not by the EPA and not by the IRS and not by, all of the alphabet agencies. Sure, they can execute and they can make, procedural rules about how to do things, but they are not the ones seized with making the decisions that the elected representatives of the people are supposed to be making. Because delegation is the lifeblood of the administrative state. And the administrative state has been identified by the Americans, by a certain constituency of Americans, as the leading problem in their country. We can give them an opportunity to fix the Constitution so as to essentially undermine, eliminate, control their administrative state.
It's a good start. It's a good start. Matt, there's no Canadian leaders talking about this. It's not anybody's promise to go ahead and do this. Even our PPC leader, Maxime Bernier, is kind of leaving us down the road because there's more important pressing issues. And that seems to be the common message. We got other things to deal with, which is the perfect distraction to having this conversation, because we're always going to have something to deal with. So maybe it is a time that we're a bunch of adults and we stand up and say, yes, we have problems. But if you realize a lot of those problems could be dealt with if we have this other conversation about where we need to be heading, that might spur that on. So nobody's really talking about this on a leader level. And Disney released Hamilton, and there was that play down in New York that did quite well. That romanticized the whole idea of having a revolution. Now, they kind of left out the bloody part. Okay, they kind of just skipped over that. Yay, we win. But that's kind of what a revolution looks like. It can get very, very uncomfortable. So what would something like that look like here? Would we have to get into I don't want to say force, because I don't think we need to go down that road. But if we continue to have the elites and, these forces in Montreal, Toronto, and other places, but using the media to push us down, and the voice of the people are not actually coming forward, and there is a desire, is there another path forward? Or how does this look in your mind if we have to make that step?
Oh, I mean, we've been, I guess, sort of alluding to this and dancing around this a little bit, but throughout the course of our discussion so far, but it's not clear in my mind the mechanics of what that would look like for Canada as a whole. The only thing my limited mind can sort of grapple with is the sort of line that Bruce has been developing pertaining to the Alberta front as the key crack in the structure, out of which a lot of usefully disruptive, very uncomfortable realities will pour down upon the rest of Canada, as well as the deep state, which much of it is actually being directed from forces far removed from Ottawa,
right.
Say even this continent. You got to go way across the ocean, actually, to look at things like Chatham House, the Royal Institute, various directing think tanks that have also infiltrated the United States through the banking system, as well as the intelligence agencies, in order to sort of get a sense of what this thing is, because it's very multifaceted. It's a behemoth, and it's multi-generational. It's got its own sort of internal organization that's outside. It's in the shadows. There's an exoteric and an esoteric aspect to it. The esoteric inner structure of it is not something most Canadians have a clue of what goes on in the decision making within the Privy Council office, or the Privy Council per se, or the Prime Minister's office, as far as unelected hyper deep state structures, right? They don't know. They have no clue. The North American Union discussion that what's his name, Bill Graham, and what's the other guy, Thomas Axworthy, the former assistant to the personal assistant to Pierre Elliott Trudeau. They don't know how those decisions were even brought about back in 2006 for a North American Union, which I don't see that as having gone away. Like, that's one of the the idea of creating a reset using the catalyzer of an economic disintegration of the transatlantic banking system that could then be able to usher in a degree of chaos, controlled chaos, out of which order could be imposed that would force the continent to look a lot more like the European Union, which saw a complete destruction of sovereign decision-making powers of the member states of Europe. That's been on the agenda for a while. And again, Bill Graham, the president of the Canada International Council, the Canadian Roundtable, he played a key role, as he did with creating Canada 2020, that selected Justin Trudeau, that interfaced with the behaviorists that installed Obama and the other behaviorists like Richard Thaler in the United States from 2006 to 2009. They're still there. Diane Carney is a co-founding manager of this thing, the wife of Mark.
Yep.
All of the privy councillors that set up Canada 2020, I think, are closer to the nerve center of real power, which I think about. And I don't think most Canadians have a clue. And if they don't have a clue, they won't really know how to avoid the traps, how to avoid the the type of mass hive mind manipulation that we've been subjected to for so many decades and generations. It's not an easy one to break out of. So for me, it's like I have to look at the world top down as a chemistry first. So I'm always looking at like globally, like what is the global dynamic? Where is the death cult got its tentacles more in grip? And where has it been loosened? Where is there a resistance? I see currently evidence of a fight in the United States, though again, the transhumanist faction, I don't trust the religious ideologues that want to fuse human beings with machines as part of the next phase of our evolution that they want to direct, that you see with people like, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. Elon Musk's grandpa, Joshua Haldeman, was the founder of Technocracy, or the guy who ran Technocracy Inc. in Canada. And that North American Technate is sort of exactly what the North American Union was 80 years before the North American Union was proposed, which again calls for Greenland and North America all the way down to the Darien Gap being consolidated under a new control. That would be very anti-democratic. So I see these ideological battle lines going on, and I hope that the pro-industrial, authentic spirit of the best of America that I see emerging with Trump will win the day and force those discussions into Canada. But there's this other thing too that might also be using this as a trap to enmesh the U.S. into a new mechanism that might involve doing a revival of what Bill Graham and Axworthy and the Canada 2020 crowd that Mark Carney is deeply enmeshed in when they put on when they set the stage for the North American Union. They might be trying to trick the United States into becoming more British Canada than Canada becoming more American. That might be a track. I'm weary, and I'm focusing on educating as many people as possible. And I'm hoping Maxime can also upgrade a little bit his capacity to educate people on some of these subtleties. Because if you don't have that, you could have all the well-meaning people you want, but they're gonna slip and fall easy when they try to go up against this beast. So, yeah.
And that's where I have a lot of concern, because even the idea of consolidating America or growing America larger isn't concerning to me, because as power is coming into one state. And I'm not saying that's a reason not to do it, but you shouldn't be ignoring that as well. Bruce, a clear question on a referendum. I would expect rural to be a lot of support for it, very already independent minds. It will be a battle in the cities, so Edmonton, Calgary, Red Deer, etc. It'll be a battle there. And let's...
Yeah.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah, and let's say it does come back, 70% or so support out of Alberta to go ahead and do this. But we're getting absolutely no response out of Ottawa. They're treating us a lot like the truckers did when they came in 2022, not even sitting down to talk. We start threatening court actions, and this is kind of where it goes. And then, of course, Albertans are going to stand up and protest, because if we said, yes, we want to do this, but the government's stopping us, this is exactly the conditions that will get some sort of response out of Alberta, and then a response out of the federal government. Is this going to be some issue on the Saskatchewan-Alberta border? Like, what are we heading to if that's where this...
I don't think we should try to imagine too far ahead.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think any political leaders anywhere in the country will pick this up and run with it, even in Alberta.
Not currently, no.
Not right now. And so not even Danielle. There's no reason for her to do that. So I'm afraid that the people of Alberta will have to take the first step on their own. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but here's a possibility. You organize your own referendum on a clear question, and you get 70%. And you make it clear to whoever is the government in Alberta that if they want to stay in power, they better get on the ship. And then you have to have an official referendum that the government will sponsor and organize and so on. So then you get your 70% in a different form. And then you've got something, and now you can negotiate. And if the federal government won't negotiate with you, well, then you have a constitutional crisis.
Right.
As would have been the case with Quebec if their referendum had succeeded. And who knows where it goes from there. But I suspect, because we are Canadian, I suspect it will not be violent, which is the way it's supposed to be. So let's not try to speculate too far ahead. Right now, we have an opportunity. It's not going to last very long. I'm not even sure that all this can be done within the time available, because we don't know how long the door will be open. Trump will be in power for 4 years. Who knows what will follow him? I'm sure the Americans will remain interested in the territory, but the conditions are right now to at least explore the possibilities and to take a meaningful step if we can identify one. So let's not get stuck on the details.
And that's a fair point, because we don't know how this would unfold. I just kind of know the sentiment of some of the people out there, and I wouldn't think it would be violent. That's not in our nature, but
No.
blocking our cattle to go from Ontario, or stopping some sort of shipments coming in. That's the kind of stuff.
Well, sure, but you see, so one of the advantages that the Americans have, and I take the point that there are forces in the states that are dangerous, and that there's a battle going on for ascendancy. All that is true, but one of the things that the Americans have that we mostly lack is at least they're having an argument between two sides. We don't have that. We have mostly a consensus, especially amongst our chattering classes. And I would rather have an argument about these basic things than to have what has become the Canadian assumption that things are going to be this way because we are morally righteous and superior. That won't do. That just will not do. And if you want to live, if you want to be a free country, a free person in a free country, then you should not wait for the political elites in this country to reform themselves. It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So so all we have right now is a shot, and that's all the Americans have right now. They've at least given themselves a chance. And how that will turn out, we don't know. But they have a chance, and right now, our chances are not looking very good unless we choose this.
Okay, and here's some of, I think, the good news about Danielle is once she's supported, when she has support, she will make moves and she will do things. So if there was a citizen-based, Albertan-based referendum by the people, and it came back clear, I think you would see her message would go that way, because fundamentally that's how she feels. This is the Danielle we saw before she became premier. She supported the Coutts blockade. She supported the activities and what the message was about. So I would see if she was supported by the Albertans, she would do it. Or she might be afraid that someone else who would do it would replace her, because we would have an election in 2027 or so. And as you know, with the UCP, they don't mind replacing leaders midterm if that's necessary. So this might be, again, the perfect storm in Alberta. A leader that could, if supported, make that kind of change, or a party that could replace a leader if that's the change that the base is looking for. And you don't need to get all of Albertan for that on that one, the party one. You need the party support on that one. And that could be enough to cause the conversation to happen in all of Alberta. Right. So there's some ways to maneuver. So how about baby steps? Because one of the things I proposed a couple months ago now is provincial constitution. This is something we can do without radical change or even permission from the federal government. That's something we could do. You can't change it to a republic, but you can start taking a little bit more control of some things, or at least open the idea to it. Is that a step in the wrong direction, you think, and kind of just slowing things down, or maybe just giving the perception of republic? Or do you want to go pull the Band-Aid off and just go straight into it? Matt, and then I can see Bruce is nodding. Matt, I'll go to you, and then we'll go to Bruce right after.
Well, I think this is an opportunity to do a lot of soul searching fast, and I would like it to be as fast as possible, that we discover our true selves and recognize where we went wrong in our history, because we've got a whole, as I mentioned at the very beginning, my opening remarks, we're sort of built psychologically around our national myths, and our national myths are mostly lies made by a bunch of imperial sociopaths that have wanted to keep us well-behaved, more controllable, malleable subjects within a broader great game. So they've created little heroic stories about our founding fathers who, I'm sorry, when you actually look at Sir John A. Macdonald or Etienne Cartier or George Brown, or compare that to the type of intellectual and moral caliber of people who actually fought for freedom as the American founding fathers did. These guys are a joke. I'm sorry. No disrespect, but I don't respect them. So yes, disrespect. Disrespect intended to these guys. But we've been told that these are our great heroes. And so to look at our history it's like an AA meeting almost. Like we have to almost create a re-educational process as part of a political movement that could help people, I think, redefine or reappreciate what those tragedies were that led us into our present circumstances. Because the fault is, not entirely in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings, as some smart guy once said, in Julius Caesar. And so we got to take ownership a little bit of those faults that have sort of permeated. And I think when you look at the fight of W.A.C. Bennett in British Columbia, who's been given not a lot of respect, but he had a whole vision where he had a very Republican heart, though he, was operating within a very controlled Westminster system. But he had a program for, creating nationalizing this private power core operation to force the thing to behave in the interests of the province as a nation, or the creation of a Bank of BC because he couldn't get the Bank of Canada to operate the way it should, to issue loans for the purpose of developing the nation. That's not, those who ran it were not allowing that ideologically. It was a death cult. It was a bunch of Rhodes Scholars, like Davy Fulton and others who just didn't care about, they didn't want Canada to develop. But so he was like, well, let's create a Bank of BC, and we'll use that to emit the credit needed for the building of the Peace River dams and the other rail that was ultimately sabotaged by a bunch of green ideologues after he was ousted, that prevented it from extending into Alaska the way it was supposed to. The rail line to Dease Lake, that's called the rail line to nowhere. So, but there were these fights to create institutions that would be Republican in spirit, even though it was still within the monarchical system. And I think we don't know about that all of those battles that involve people dying. I mentioned Daniel Johnson probably was assassinated, the premier of Quebec in 1968. We got people who fought, died. Pierre Laporte, who got murdered, who was an enemy of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and got strangled ritualistically during the October crisis. That was also the RCMP, by the way, that did that. If people didn't know, that was an inside job that had tanks on the streets of Quebec. So we gotta, I think, if we look at that, if we have the strength to look at that darker but truthful part of our history, we'll be better able to reappreciate what we should be doing and valuing in the current crisis that we find ourselves in now, such that we'll make much more wise, thoughtful decisions about how to navigate the storm. And it's going to get even worse. It's not like the Wall Street banks are not going to collapse. It's just a question of when is the derivative time bomb going to blow? These things are unpayable. These derivatives debts are completely, it's a time bomb built into the system, and we're locked into it in Canada too. So we got to think, how do we deal with that very foreseeable thing in a way that benefits the people and not the arsonists who have created these fires and want to, control the chaos to impose some form of messed up order, which might look a lot worse than the problem. So those are the sorts of considerations I have. And I don't know what type of political movement that could look like. I know I'm a friend of Randy Hillier, and I liked his style when he organized, back when he was still in the provincial assembly in Ontario. He organized his constituency, which is mostly farmers, to go and encircle the parliament or the Ontario legislature in 2008 and 2009, and he made a strategy out of just using the power of physical production to take a stand. The truckers gave a great example of how that could work as well, which had a lot of Alberta behind it. So we got to think on those creative terms right now. It's got to be really outside of the box, because the rules, if we play within the rules of the system, we're going to lose. It's a casino. You're not going to come out as a winner. It's designed
100%. Yeah.
And that's going to be the challenge. I'm going to set this up for you, Bruce, because you talked about heroes. But what we had of the trucker movement, and Randy Hillier is one of them, is martyrs, because they were actually attacked and lost a bunch and had to go through, some of them locked up. And this has created an environment now where nobody wants to step up and be a leader, an influencer, or an organizer. But as we were talking about the perfect storm, Carney is another big variable. So in a short time, it looks like we're going to have an unelected PM. And I don't know if Canadians are going to enjoy that, if they're going to like even that idea. And when they learn about the fact that that can happen, this might be yet another accelerator of this. Now, you didn't like the idea of slowly taking steps. You want to pull this Band-Aid off and get right in there. So we may have some more acceleration coming up with Carney and some other issues.
Yeah, so people who are sort of on this page are interested in these possibilities. I don't think they should be working too hard to try to prevent outrageous things from happening. So if Carter becomes our PM and starts to rule like the PM and has never been elected, I mean, that is a great campaign argument for doing what we're talking about. I mean, that's an illustration of how this doesn't work, because that should not be possible. But that is possible under the Westminster system as it has evolved in Canada. So you're not going to take the system as it exists and have the people who are inside the system decide, oh yeah, all you guys are right, we should really reform this so as to restrict our own power, right? Mm-hmm. The idea of the rule of law in this country worked only for as long as the people in power believed in the idea. And they don't believe it anymore. Not really. And so you have to stop appealing to the idea as though people who are in power are going to hear you and say, oh yes, we've been wrong all this time. We should really reform ourselves and restrict our own abilities. That's not going to happen. So you have to go forward and do it yourself.
That sounds like a populist movement, though. It sounds like.
Listen. And
I'm not against that. You know this.
I know that. Yeah. But the American Revolution was a populist movement, mm-hmm. right? And we don't want a revolution in that sense. We don't want any fighting, and I don't think that's going to happen. But if you have people who are, for example, so I mentioned the possibility, and it's just one possibility. But if you had people who said to themselves, all right, you know what? We're going to organize in Alberta for the sole purpose of holding a referendum on a question that we're going to draft, and we're going to draft it as clearly and as openly as we can, so as to give people a clear choice to express themselves about what they think. Okay? If you had that as the activity, then the authorities would be very hard pressed to take legal action against you. I mean, it would be very difficult to figure out what to charge you with. And if you managed in that enterprise to get an expression on the part of a significant portion, and it has to be significant, it can't just be nooks and crannies and particular constituencies. It has to be very broad, that at least indicates that a large portion of the people are fed up with the way things are and are open to the other possibility. Then you've got something. Without that, you don't have very much.
I like that a lot. And here's the thing I like about you, Bruce, is you have a really brilliant legal mind. But I'm going to throw this to Matt because he also has a perspective about the dark side of what goes on. So even though you say, legally you're doing a referendum, they'll probably leave you alone. The dark side doesn't play by the legal rules. There is no rule of law for them. So doing things like targeting the leader and then pulling out an old thing from the past or a friend from the history that said, hey, they did something bad to me. Like we see this with nominees for the Supreme Court in the U.S. Like there is a real dark side to this world. So they have ways. But I do think that if there's enough people fighting up and they know this and they kind of keep an eye out for this, Matt, do you think there's a possibility we can navigate through that? I would call like a minefield of grassroots efforts to try and get through.
Yeah, we could. Sure. But again, it does require competent leadership. And I look at the way I framed my 4-volume Untold History of Canada books, and I did another 4-volume Clash of the Two Americas books to sort of try to reframe it in my own mind, just so I could understand. I was trying to map out and understand, how the hell did we get here? What's our story? With an understanding that this thing called deep state has always been there as an agency that has a certain modus operandi, certain governing principles that are non-negotiable, which are very anti-human, that have a certain ethos in a master-slave dichotomized structure of feudalism that they're absolutely committed to. And then you've got this better, much more human spirit that's emerged and broken free of the shackles from time to time, right? But part of what I've noticed about Canada is I've had to approach it from this standpoint of classical tragedy. That's why I sort of cited my Julius Caesar earlier on, but Canada is really, because what is a classical tragedy? It's not just like bad things happening to good people. That's a very overly simplistic idea of tragedy. It's that you had somebody, a Hamlet, for example, who had the potential to be a great leader if they could get over their shit and become more self-reflective, but he couldn't. He was the prince of Denmark, and it was at siege, at war. As there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, at the very beginning, what is it? But now this guy has all of the creative potential to be that type of qualified leader to save the city at a time of crisis, but instead he can't get over his jealousy, his paranoia, all of these this baggage that just drives him to do the most dumb things that result in his Ophelia dying, and then everybody's dead by the end, including him. And then Fortinbras just walks right in. And everybody's dead. And he's like, "Well, I thought I was gonna have to fight. I just walked right in, and nobody was there to resist me." So I think that you've got, when I look at the difference between a non-tragic case of what America was in 1776, it didn't emerge out of a vacuum. I look at Ben Franklin as a guy who organized for several decades, starting in the 1730s, really, to create a cultural climate of heightened literacy. He built juntas, committees of correspondences, of people who could then sharpen their mental moral tools to become that next generation of qualified leaders that didn't exist in the colonies as he lived in them in the 1740s. It just wasn't there. And part of his fight involved his discovery of electricity, which he saw as part and parcel for his ideas of natural law in the political domain. It was two sides of the same thing in his philosophy also, which was that we have to abide by natural law, which is also the laws of physics. The moral laws they weren't as dichotomized back in those days as they have become in our messed up day and age today that we find ourselves in. So he created that structure. He created Canada's first newspapers. He brought in Fleury de Méplat from France to build a non-existent literate population by bringing in newspapers, reading, literacy. He brought in our postal service. It's Ben Franklin who created Canada's postal service, because he had an idea of expanding the peasant mentality to think of your identity as beyond your little local environment. So again, he knew that you needed to be able to communicate, have that broader sense of context. And, and then within that fertile soil, you could do the thing. With the case of Mackenzie King, he tried. He was a good guy. I read his newspapers, The Colonialist and The Constitutional. Anyway, Mackenzie King, who led the Upper Canada Rebellion with Louis-Joseph Papineau at the same time, they had the right idea, the right heart, but they didn't take the time needed to create that cultural matrix in which those aspirations could not be sabotaged. And within 2 weeks, there were so many infiltrators, yep. run by John Russell, Lord Russell, who just they just undermined the whole thing. It was a shitstorm and fell apart in Upper and Lower Canada. And the thing just came undone after 2 seconds. So much more tragic. And somebody should do a movie or an actual classical. Some artist out there should take up this challenge of recasting that story. That way, I think would be a great story. Painful, but so that's what I'm sort of looking at today, is how do we avoid tragedy? And that means we need to be able to craft qualified leaders, which is my focus of attention. And I'm not seeing enough of it, man. I mean, I really need to see more of that, to have that faith that we can carry out that battle in a way that won't blow up in our face too quickly. So I don't want to be a cynical guy. I just spent a lot of time looking at evil structures and their techniques, and I'm like, no, they're really sophisticated. We got to be really sharp.
Well, we have an Albertan, somebody from Ontario, and another one from Quebec on the screen right now, and maybe we can help Canada start heading in this direction with these kind of conversations. And what we're going to do, Bruce, we're going to jump over to our supporters. And Matt, I know that you said you didn't have much time. Hopefully you can stick around for a couple of questions. We may have a few for you.
I got till 9:30.
Perfect. We'll go do that right now. But Bruce, before we jump over there, what are your thoughts there? What Matt had to say? Because historically, it's playing a role, and I think sometimes Canadians are historically numb. We really don't know our history, and maybe that's kind of why some people aren't even asking for this. Because if we knew more, this is like an easy no-brainer. So education and getting the message out there and changing the culture sounds like that might be part of the steps to get this done.
Oh, sure. I mean, I have no objection to that at all. And in fact, I'm on board with that. But those things take time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure we have the time. I think there are enough people in the country already who are attuned to these things. It's not as many as I would like. But I'm not convinced that there aren't people who could be leaders in this enterprise. I worry a little bit that if we are too thorough in our desire for education of a certain type, that we'll just spend the rest of our days trying to educate and not actually do.
Okay, I like that message. So if you're listening right now, take Bruce's message and share this out there. Let's not wait. Let's share this information out. Start educating your neighbors, your family. Take this to the kitchen table. Take it to your church, and get people to understand what it is that we're kind of talking about here. Thank you very much, Bruce and Matt. Please stick around. We have some more questions for you. But now the action is on you, Canada, especially if you're in Alberta. Share this out. We don't have to necessarily go straight to separation, but we should have separation with a plan. And is there a way to step and take those directions? Is there a way to signal to the rest of Canada, hey, you guys should be looking at this too? Is that a way to wake up Canada? The headlines are, Alberta's talked about leaving. Maybe, but let's have the conversation. So let's go and share this out. So if you're in Alberta, you're in Canada, Ontario, Quebec, get this information out there and let's have this conversation and accelerate it. Taking the time to put together curriculum and teaching the system we will not get done quick enough. And as Bruce is highlighting here, we may not have that kind of time. So share this now. So hang on, we're going to jump over right now. So public, thank you very much. Make sure you take care of yourself and your family. You shake the hand of a neighbor or a stranger and share this message when you do that too. And why do I keep reminding you about this? It's because I love you all very much and God bless.